Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Maurice. Maurice, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Great. Thank you, Tom. I'm Maurice Liddell. I am a principal with BDO Digital, which is a subsidiary of BDO, and we are the fifth largest CPA firm in the world. And I primarily focus on helping organizations in the marketplace to leverage technology for improving operations and managing and mitigating risk. And I'm talking to you from hot Houston, Texas.
Okay, great. And I'm talking to you from a hot Seville in Spain. We're at about 40 degrees centigrade at the moment. That's about 110 Fahrenheit, if my numbers are about right. We've had several weeks, well, over a month, in fact, of temperatures, at or around 40 degrees. It's been pretty insane. I got to say, this summer has been mad, and unfortunately, it's not going to get any better, is it? I mean, I think we will in 2033 look back on the kind of cool, balmy summer we had in 2023 if things are going the same way they have been for the last couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, Tom, so no, I'm not going to complain about my 38 degrees here. So,
Okay, okay. So, Maurice, we've seen. We'll move off the weather topic. We've seen uh, huge shifts in technology in the last 6, 8, 10 months, I want to say. Particularly the rise of AI has come really to the forefront of people's minds, particularly since the release, I will say, of ChatGPT in the end of November last year. So things have really kicked off. And it's making a huge impression in supply chain, the same as every other industry. What are you seeing as you are, deep in the technology and supply chain space? What kind of changes are you starting to see?
yeah, so Tom, I agree with you. It's been a topic of conversation with almost every company that I'm talking to these days, right? And so, with anything new, there's always that FUD that comes with it: the fear, uncertainty, doubt, and also fear of missing out, right? Am I
Yeah.
am I missing an opportunity here? And this is where we have really had a lot of great conversations saying, how are we leveraging this technology to really improve things, and in particular about like safety? And there's been a lot of advances in safety technology in the past where we're taking a look at just like say passive technology, barriers, color coding, and so forth. But we're really seeing the technology being able to help, I think, kind of elevate safety awareness and improving safety programs. And the way that I like to look at this is really it's a system, right? And
Okay.
if you take a look at first of all from like a cultural perspective, how an organization really embraces safety. Then you take a look at, of course, the environment and talked about like the passive barriers and how we protect workers. But then there's also get into elements such as the employee themselves and their training and then the processes that they have to follow. So we're seeing this technology being able to really affect every one of those, right? So if we start to think about, first of all, the culture and how can we, like I said, leverage technology to improve the culture, we start to think about how does that affect profits, profitability, the overall, I'd say, organization's reputation. And so that helps drive establishing a good culture around that. But then we take a look from the employee and starting to leverage technologies like AI for helping with the training. Taking a look at immersive technologies and being able to use virtual reality and augmented reality to train an individual on their processes and the environment before they actually get in it. That's helping to make a more aware individual.
Right.
And then we start taking a look at the overall, like I said, the environment piece of it. And this is where we can leverage technologies like computer vision and being able to identify, potentially hazardous situations before they actually occur. So now we've really moved from being in the reactionary to being proactive and predictive based upon situations. And this is where I think it's some pretty exciting uses of the technology. Said computer vision tied with artificial intelligence. What if we're able to see spills or debris in a certain pathway before there's any equipment or workers going down that path? Being able to alert to that and being able to resolve it. Or what about if we can leverage it to identify these safety zones? And so if you see movement within a certain type of safety zone, that would be a big red flag, and we'd be able to alert and take some preventative measures, around that. So I said
Right.
these are all exciting conversations we're having with organizations and getting deployed, these types of things. It's not, this isn't future, right? This is actually today now. And chat gpt is, like I said, conversation and a topic which is helping to drive those conversations.
Fascinating, fascinating. I assume it could do things as well. I mean, you mentioned safety zones, but for example, I assume it could spot if a worker wasn't wearing a helmet or other safety equipment as well, and alert to that.
That's absolutely correct. So we're actually utilizing these technologies today for those exact things. So you can define all sorts of different types of rules of which the technology can help to identify and implement. So are they wearing the proper PPE? Or are they in a location where they're not supposed to be? Or you see convergence, man and machine, forklifts and workers. Like I said, that's a very common type of incident, is where you have human and machine interaction from material movements, and being able to just identify that and make alerts, either visual or enunciations, you know. And then in addition to, we're seeing a lot of uptake in the use of wearables, and
Oh
not
yeah.
and utilizing those wearables to actually start with training. I'm saying where organizations have built a program, they outfit a new employee with wearables, and it's monitoring their work activities, is how they exercise their duties, and being able to identify, times when they're under stress, or if they're getting exposed to certain types of materials, gases, so forth, and they can use that information then to modify their work procedures and processes.
Right.
And so, like I said, just that there's a lot of different, I think, fascinating applications of this technology.
Yeah, even my own watch, put on the screen there, even my own watch, just an Apple Watch, can alert me to things like when I'm in an area with excessive noise. So it'll send an alert saying, it's exceeded a certain number of decibels. You want to be careful. So I imagine that would be very useful as well in the industrial zone. If you're in a manufacturing plant or something, you want to make sure workers are wearing ear protection in those kind of scenarios.
Absolutely. And so, with this technology, either it's a wearable or it's other type of environmental systems, those situations can all be identified, and being able to help, like I said, be preventive versus reacting to when a situation does occur.
Sure, sure. And it's not just about keeping workers safe, is it? Because if you have an accident, you can then potentially require downtime and investigation. You're losing time, which otherwise would be used to keep the plant running and keep productivity up.
No, that's absolutely correct, Tom. And so we saw early adoption of some of these AI technologies to really focus on that, like I said, preventative or predictive maintenance, and being able to identify when a particular piece of equipment may be going out of calibrations, either through vibrations or temperatures, current draws. These are all things that can easily be monitored, and that will give you telltale signs that something's not right. And being able to kind of schedule and fix that, because it's always cheaper, easier, faster to be able to provide a simple fix versus potentially replacing a whole piece of equipment if a belt were to break, for example, and that can cause all sorts of damage, as well as create a safety related issue for workers. So those two definitely go hand in hand.
Okay. And I mean, another use of the likes of these large language models has to be to facilitate maintenance, because just a couple of examples from my own home here, for example, I wanted to find out where a particular component was in my car. And so I went to Bing Chat and I gave it the model of the vehicle that I had, and I said which part I was trying to locate, and it was able to put up a diagram, a schematic of my vehicle, pointing out exactly where that component I was looking for was located in the car. And similarly, I had an issue with the dishwasher in the kitchen. And it's not a particularly common dishwasher, but it's an old one from a good while back. And it's a model that's no longer being sold. So again, same kind of thing. I gave it the model number, the make and model number, and I told it what component I was looking for. And again, it was able to pull up a schematic. So I can imagine in those kind of scenarios, particularly if it's something that's no longer being manufactured, and maybe the manufacturer has gone out of business, finding those details might be challenging. But for something like a large language model, very often it's trivial. You find it in seconds.
That's absolutely correct. Tom, I had a very similar situation very recently in trying to an old truck and needing to add coolant to it, and so I didn't have any idea where that port was on that truck, and so it did the exact same thing. But you bring up a really good point here, and we start talking about augmented reality and leveraging this technology. So as a person is trying to do maintenance, being able to display the schematics or the information in a very simple format, right? So maybe I'm trying to execute this particular procedure. It can give me detailed steps, and highlighting the next element of it, and being able to present like a 3D model of it and highlighting exactly where they need to focus on, and even being able to demonstrate the procedure to it.
Right.
So that definitely, I think, helps from an overall efficiency standpoint. It helps with educating the workers, right, and doing the proper procedures. And then, like I said, so we get the equipment back up and running as quickly as we can, and in a safe manner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as well, you can find, for example, manuals for bits of equipment that might have gone out of date, or generate manuals for pieces of equipment that have gone out of date too, right?
So this is when we start taking a look at these language models and being able to utilize it. You mentioned ChatGPT earlier. Being able to generate documentation around this is just a wonderful opportunity to get all these manuals available. So you can, within the prompts, be able to enter all the details around the piece of machinery, what you're trying to do, and say, generate me the operating manual or the procedures for doing this, and it will generate this within seconds. And I
Wow.
said, so when we start taking a look at when I was talking earlier, kind of like the whole environment or system. So starting with the training element of it, this is something that can be extremely helpful because a lot of this equipment lasts quite a while,
Yeah.
and very capital intensive to replace. So take a look at some of this machinery. It's going to be in a production facility for many years.
Hmm.
So being able to have good documentation on that we can train the new workers on, to whereas people have retired, the person that actually put that in may no longer be available. This is a great opportunity for leveraging technology for very quickly generating manuals, um, and for operating procedures, to like I said, for education purposes as well as for efficiency purposes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And of course, some of the equipment, the manuals that came with it back in the day, might have been written in oblique English or by someone for whom English was a second or third language. And now you can just say, well, this is the piece of equipment. Are you familiar with it? Yes. Act as a safety engineer and write out procedures for using this safely, or, whatever it is you want it to do.
Now, in that is correct, and you can even go beyond that and saying you can do what are the common issues, right, and
Mm,
identifications of those. So you can even go beyond what just the manual is, but based upon historical information, these are the things that I need to be thinking about, or what my issues can be. What are my steps to be able to do the troubleshooting around with it? So those things that didn't exist back then, now you can generate those.
right. Fantastic, fantastic. What about using AI with robots, Maurice? Because I know that's starting to happen now as well. And what kind of potential do you think that has?
With that's an area where I think there's some potential challenges, right? And if we kind of take a look back of maybe what are challenges for adopting this technology. There's a couple of things that we need to think about, but one of them is trust.
Mm.
And there's already individuals that just don't really trust robots to begin with, either because they feel they might be taking their jobs, or there's been so many science fiction movies about how robots have really tried to take over. So as you take a look at like iRobot was one of them, and there's several like that. So like trust becomes an issue. I think
Yeah,
that's something where we're going to have to take steps to be able to kind of prove these things out and be able to help build, like I said, trust from individuals on that. We're also going to have to work with, I'd say, unions and other workers, right? Because you take a look at some concerns might be Big Brother. Someone's watching over me, and someone's going to be taking my job when we start adding this into the additional robot. So I think that's kind of like a overall, I think, technology adoption and change program where we have to work with management. We have to work with the workers and the unions to be able to, like I said, have them part of the decision making process, get people comfortable with that technology. And then one of
sure.
the other challenges too with all these things is just what about the connectivity and networking? Right?
Mm.
So some of these legacy plants, they are not necessarily wired for that type of technology. So here we bring in like 5G technology, being able to help with that overall connectivity between the different devices, between the robots themselves. And so, kind of back to your question there, Tom. I get excited about the use of these technologies. I think there's a great play for them, but we're going to have to deal with those adoption issues as we start getting more into more to where we have equipment kind of acting as a human, if you will.
Right. But I mean, the advantages of robots are well known now. I mean, they can you can send a robot into a room where a human couldn't go because of temperatures or pressures or things like that. You can have it lift loads that humans couldn't do, or humans couldn't do safely, or at least pick up a box that a human would find hard to do and a robot easy to do, or mechanize a production line with robots doing tasks that are just too boring for a human to do, you know. And so the advantages of robots in those kind of scenarios, and in warehousing as well, we're seeing a lot of robotics starting to enter and automate as well, right?
No, completely agree. In those types of scenarios, Tom, I couldn't agree with you more. Right? We've seen a lot of robots being used for material movements and being able to do, just in time type of material movements throughout plants. And you talk about like the heavy lifting and other types of dangerous environments. Completely agree. Those are great applications of it. What I'm trying to think is on what's next with these types of
Mm.
things is we're always trying to think how can we improve these things, and as we start thinking about what can robots do better versus what can humans do better, things like quality control, where you can quickly scan a component and checking for things that are out of compliance. A robot can do that much better, much faster than what a
Right.
human can. But certain type of assemblies to where we still haven't mastered or the movement required for these detailed assemblies, a human can do that better. Right?
Right.
But we can supplement them with we'll talk about like the schematics or the drawings. So let's call it augmented reality assembly line to where it can help project. This is where you need to do something, or here is a particular zone you need to work with. That's where I think you get a great complementary of man, machine, and technology. So as we progress type in leveraging this technology, I think it's unlimited of what we can do. But there's always going to be that point to where a human can do certain things better than what the
Mm.
technology can. And how do we best kind of merge those two type of capabilities?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And speaking of that, of getting humans and robots working better together, I can see using the likes of large language models as a way to facilitate that. Because if you combine the large language models of the likes of the ChatGPTs with voice to text and text to voice technologies, you can then start having a conversation with a robot and ask it to do something, and it'll reply to you in just natural language as opposed to having type in commands and all that kind of thing. Suddenly your human to robot interface goes away.
That's correct. And so we use that today in our households, right? And you talk to your phone, or you talk to other devices saying, "Hey Google," or "Hey Alexa," and being able to get that type of response. That's going to increase efficiency. It's going to help reduce errors. But there are still, this technology isn't perfect, right? And it's just, even like, let's just say we use Alexa or Google, sometimes you get a response back that baffles you a little bit, right? And so the same thing can apply here. And it's going to progress. It's going to get better as we do it with these language models. But yeah, it makes things so much easier. And especially when someone is like doing maintenance, you talked about earlier, and being able to say, okay, can you give me the procedures for doing this type of activity? And then if it can speak to you of doing the step, you can speed it up, slow it down, skip steps. It just makes it much more efficient for an individual. It makes it into a format that that individual is most comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to read, others they like to be talked to, right? And then you can even utilize, let's talk about, progressing into holograms, of
Yeah.
being able to display a hologram around this and do a rotating 3D model around that. So that is where I think there's a lot of promise around those things, Tom.
Yeah. I mean, if I just think back, I've been doing podcasting off and on since 2005 is when I did my first podcast, and the technology has advanced so much in the last 18 years in this space. When I did it first, I had to create my own RSS files for the podcast. Now all that's automated. Now I can take the audio file today from this recording, drop it into an AI app, and have it come out with a full transcription for me within a matter of minutes. And then I can start, there's a program I use called Descript for the editing, and I can start editing the transcription. And as I edit the transcription, it edits the audio file. So if I remove a sentence from the transcription, it removes the edit from the audio file. And if I'm working with the video files, it works exactly the same. So I can just start pulling out sentences here and there from the transcription, and it automatically does it on the audio and the video file. It's mind-blowing stuff, It makes the editing function so much easier to do, and it also gives me a full transcription automatically. Stuff that was impossible 5 years ago, never mind 18 years ago when I did my first podcast. So it's just thinking about the way that has happened. Where's AI going to take us next? What's coming down the line, do you think?
So if we kind of keep along the vein and talking about, like, from safety perspective, we started thinking about really moving more from, I'd say, passive type of safety devices to active, and that are based upon situations as well as individuals, right?
Right.
So let's say, for example, there's a while back there was a big safety incident at a foundry where an individual had fallen into a vat of molten metal, right?
Oh.
So of course that was a very devastating situation. But they fell off a scaffolding, so slip and fall, and that's what happened. What if we could augment that with, I'll call it, dynamically deployed safety nets in certain environments? So individual wearing a wearable, or you got computer vision, see a person slipping and being able to deploy a net over that molten vat, and so which would prevent the actual death. So I think we're going to continue to see an evolution of, like, safety devices, as well as what you talked about, these large language processing models. How are we going to leverage those for other types of features? It's going to get into conversations with machines. Now, you talk about, robot, a lot of people think about something that kind of looks like human or is moving around, but it can actually be a piece of equipment on the floor that is doing a process. So we're used to seeing all these different screens for the man-machine interface. Now
Mm.
we're talking to it. We're
Yeah.
giving it instructions via our voice. And then it having enough intelligence that if we tell it to do something that may not be within the right procedures or that could be a safety related issue, it can alert us to that
Yeah.
fact. So
Hmm.
help us from, harming ourselves, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when ChatGPT first came out, one of the first things I tried doing with it was speaking to it, not I, typing into it, I should say, not speaking to it. I typed into it a message in Irish. Now, Irish is a language which is spoken by, a very small number of people, and I didn't expect to get a reply. But sure enough, it replied to me in Irish. Now, what it said in its response was, yes, I can speak Irish, but not very well, so I might make some mistakes, which I thought was fair enough. But I was impressed it could say that in Irish. But the point I'm getting to is in manufacturing, in warehousing, in lots of these environments, we have people speaking different languages in the same building often. So again, these large language models, because they can speak not just English, but any language you throw at it pretty much, that's got to make as well the workers in these environments feel more comfortable being able to speak natively in their own tongue to the devices they're going to be working with, right?
Absolutely. And I think, another element to that too, Tom, is not just from the particular language, but it's also, I'd say, style. And, with that, we can definitely see a bias in these models, right? Because they're trained by information that we provide them. And so I think we have to just be conscious about that information that we're feeding it and making sure that we are not introducing our own biases into it. And
Sure.
so that we feed it enough information that has, I think, a broad type of, I'd say, just it's a broad type of data versus just from one type of source. And where we've seen this happen in the past is like when organizations use this for hiring practices and saying, okay, let's take the information on our most successful workers, and maybe it's a resume, maybe it's their profiles or information based upon the performance reports, feed this into the models, and now let's leverage this to identify, from all the resumes that are out there, who are going to be the most likely next successful workers. Well, if the vast majority of those people that the analysis has been done on are males, you're going to start excluding females,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I talk about. We need to be kind of conscious that we do have certain biases in these models, and we need to just think about that and make sure that we're not introducing those types of biases and compensate for that.
Sure. That makes sense. Yep. Maurice, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
I think it's just, one thing I'd like to just emphasize is that early on I talked about kind of like the overall, it's a safety system, and it's really based upon overall safety culture. And so I think we've all heard that statement of by certain companies saying people before profits,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is where I think safety can really help an organization maximize profits. And you talked about it earlier, Tom, to whereas if we do more of the predictive and preventative maintenance, we're able to provide workers with information about how best to do the procedures, and we flag it if we think it's something that's not going to be safe. So I think that phrase really changes that. They're not mutually exclusive between safety and profits, but I think it's really thinking about safe workers help maximize profits. And so I think it
Right.
just kind of changes that narrative a little bit, because I know that, some organizations say we it's not in the budget, or, we're really focused on our certain core operations. But like I said, I challenge that and thinking into that by helping our workers to be safer through this technology. There's a tremendous ROI on it. And there's been several case studies on this to where organizations have deployed this, the wearables, the training, and utilizing augmented realities. It's the return on investment is magnitudes greater than what the cost is. And in addition, it's also helping with organizational reputation.
Hmm.
You're starting to retain more of your workers because people feel safe, right? And no one
Yeah,
wants to work in a unsafe environment. So I said it just has a tremendous amount of benefits, and the technology AI is just a core component to help make that all happen.
fantastic. Fantastic. Great. Maurice, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the topics we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So we have a plethora of information regarding the use of this technology on both our BDO manufacturing as well as our digital websites. So I'll send you a link to these, Tom, so you can share this with your audience.
Great.
And there's also contact information there if people wish to use that.
Perfect. Superb. Maurice, that's been fantastic. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Tom, thank you. It's definitely a topic I'm very excited about. I love to see how where this technology is going. And I think you said it well. This is going to be totally different than 18 months, 2 years, 5 years. It's exciting. So thank you for having me on.